Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Glintstone Chapter 15 Unchained Pain. It was all-encompassing, all-enveloping. I floated in that pain, unable to form enough of a thought to remember why I was here and why I was hurting. Fire rushed through my veins and ice froze in my organs. I could feel nothing, see nothing, hear nothing but pain. I saw a pulsing black cloud, each pulse corresponding with a fresh wave of pain that racked my body. There was nothing in my ears but a dull roaring, the sound of a waterfall breaking apart on sharp rocks. I was carried in that raging torrent that cast upon the shards, dashed to pieces, only to be lifted back up and dropped again. I tasted bitter iron and smelled acrid vapors. I did not know who I was, only that I hurt. Slowly, oh so slowly, the pain retreated. The cloud grew paler and the waterfall narrowed to a trickle. The ocean and the pain shrank, bit by bit, to a sea, then a lake, then a river, then a little stream. It did not leave me entirely, but it was a candle before a wildfire. It had been before. As the pain left, though, the thought returned. My name was TEDx Jakku. I was 33 years old, and I was physically impossible. For the last 2 years of my life, I had been traveling with a human named Clint Stone. We had crossed the stars and joined the rebellion against the Swarm Empire. I was chained to a table because I had to save a child. My eyes opened and beheld a rock ceiling illuminated by a light source behind me. The same thing I'd seen for 3 days. 3 days of pain. At the thought of the stream widening to a river, but I forced it down. It was surprising what you could do when you put your mind to it. For the first day, I could do nothing against the pain. It threw me wherever it wished, leaving me completely at its mercy. It had none. The second day, I had learned to ignore the pain, for the most part, when it was manageable. When it was fresh, there was nothing I could do. But after the pain left, I could think. I could ignore the last vestiges of the pain floating in my veins. The third day, today, I had managed to banish the pain when it had grown weak enough. But I knew more was to come. It always did. "I see you've awoken," said a smooth, silky voice from somewhere above my head. I had come to hate that voice. With that voice came pain. I must say, this is most impressive. I have never had someone hold out as long as you. All sorts of beings have graced that table, from gutter children to mighty soldiers. Every time, it's no exception, they break and lose their grip on reality within a day. But not you. I saw the dark outline of the speaker, outlined by the light of the room above my body. I felt a finger tap on my forehead. What is it in there that prevents it? What anchors you here? Were I a philosophical being, I would think that you were an interesting subject. But I am not a philosopher, and you are complicating my schedule. The finger lay on my forehead, and I felt the tip of the needles crouch into my shoulder. The signal that fresh pain was about to erupt. "Wait!" I tried to yell, but my voice was hoarse and my throat felt like a bag of sand had been poured down it, and the word came out louder than a whisper. The needle paused, just touching my skin. "You can still speak! That is truly wondrous. Hold on, I'll get you some water." The voice left and I was alone. There was no pain, and I was allowed a brief period of lucidity. I quickly took a note of my surroundings, the same as they had been before when I first been brought here. A bare rock ceiling and a cold table to lie on. My limbs were still in chains and my head was secured. I gave a brief tug at my chains and the limbs flared in protest. My muscles ached to a deepest fiber of the joints screamed at me, but I forced the pain down and tested the bonds holding me. They were secure, much like the last time I had tried. I had heard footsteps and sounding struggling, trying to conceal the fact that I was trying to escape. The shadow passed over my face and something cold and wet touched my lips. Water. I opened my mouth and drank greedily from the cup. I was awkward with my head immobilized, but I gulped it down anyway. Before I knew it, the water was gone. I drew a deep breath and felt it whistle against the cold insides of my throat, now less parched than before. A dragging sound came from my left. It sounded like a chair. It stopped beside my table as it creaked and Kenton sat down. I strained my eyes trying to get a good look at his face, but it was useless. The room was too dark and the table was at a bad angle. It's not every day I get to speak to one of my patients, the Quantum said in his smooth voice. Usually they're incoherent at this point, but what secrets they could tell. This being was clearly touched in the head, but I had a respite from the pain and I could use the time to gather information. I tried to speak. I found that I couldn't, cleared my throat, and tried again. Why are you doing this? The Quantum laughed, a light and breathy laugh. Straight to the point, I see. You will make a fine soldier. Very well, I'll tell you. You are here to go insane. What? Yes, I know. The sheer brilliance of it is almost too much to comprehend. The Quantum patted my shoulder. He seemed to enjoy physical contact. You see, what I'm doing here is to revolutionize warfare. I don't think you'll understand the details, but I must share it with you. Perhaps it would help you. The problem with soldiers is that they are weak. Some get frightened, some refuse to kill when they should, others disobey orders. What I'm doing will change all of that. He patted my shoulder again. You should be proud. You're going to be the first of your kind. A new generation of soldier who feels no pain, no fear, utterly ruthless and loyal to the death. Oh, and wonders of such an army could do. You're insane, I said. What the hell are you doing? Torturing beings until they broke and remodeling their minds. Oh yes, he said, completely and utterly mad. I admit it. I enjoy it, truth be told. But don't tell anyone. They'll lock me away. He giggled. And then I wouldn't be able to have so much fun. That's no good. This had gone from bad to worse. I was chained to a table and there was a crazy Quantum who enjoyed inflicting pain. But how do you turn them into soldiers? I asked, stalling for time. Anything to keep the pain away a little longer. How do you go from broken to killing machines? I heard the smile in the Quantum's voice as he replied. Haven't you been listening? I break them into killing machines. I just jack them full of their own special mixture of flow. But first, I have to break them down with pain. And you're overdue. The needle jabbed into my arm. I closed my eyes and prepared to fight a wave of pain. But it did not come. I felt the prick of the needle, but not the burning flood that followed. I looked at the Quantum as best I could, with my head bowed, and I saw him just standing there, with a posture that said that he was deep in thought. He raised a finger. You know what? I think I'll give you the first cycle of flow. That may loosen your restraint. Combined with the pain, it should, if my theory. He trailed off in faint murmurs, too quiet for me to distinguish what he was saying. The needle left my arm, and the dark shape moved out of the light. I heard shuffling and glass clinking. The dark shape returned. This may hurt, he said, his voice completely serious. I've never done this before. His voice returned to its smooth tone. But we'll just have to see. The needle jabbed into my neck and I felt molten steel flow through my veins. This was unlike the pain I'd felt before. That had swept me along with it, carrying me in a sea of pain. This drowned me. I sank to the bottom, the pain pushing me down, crushing me. Every nerve, every cell of my body was on fire. Each fire fed the next until my body was the fire. There was nothing left except the fire and the pain. And I'm sure that I screamed. I am sure that I thrashed. But I do not remember any of it. All I knew was that fire surrounding me, engulfing me, becoming me. My vision went dark, my mind stopped working. When I returned to my body, I found that I was no longer made of fire. Instead, I felt like steel, cold and rigid. My muscles were clenched tight, tighter than I had ever felt them before. My fingernails were digging into my palms, and I could feel the warmth trickling down them. I opened my hands and tendons and joined screaming in protest. I focused on the muscles on my limbs and forced them to relax. It was like unbending curved iron, but I managed to do it. When I'd done so, I opened my eyes. They were greeted by a strange sight. They saw the same thing they'd always seen, a rock ceiling. But how they saw it was different. I could see every little detail, every little crack and divot. The faint color variations were now as clear as day. I was suddenly aware of the cold table under my back. I felt the table and the cold. But more than that, I could feel the table, the slope and the structure. I knew what this was. I had never experienced it myself, but I had heard of it. I had seen it as well. This was flow. I could feel it, coursing through my veins, surging with every pump of my heart. I could feel it in my muscles, granting them a greater strength than physically possible. As I was already far stronger than I should have been, thanks to the strange physical changes to my body, the flow made me strong. I dare say that I could have taken Clint in a fight right then. He would have beaten me, but not due to greater strength. The Quantum did not know what he had just done. He had thought that he'd given flow to the Jahan, a weak race, one prone to cowardice and the lack of will to fight. He thought, even with the flow, that I would be constrained by the chains and I would not be a threat. He was wrong. He had given flow to the Jahan who fights, a Jahan who shattered the mold the rest of the race fit. I was the one of the best fighters in the galaxy, trained by arguably the best of them all. I was not weak, feeble individual who was going to stay down and accept what life threw at him. I was going to get up after life hit me and say, "Do it again. I dare you." I tugged gently at my restraints, getting a feel for my strength. To my delight, I found that one I was already loose. It must have happened during my thrashing. I took advantage of that, and I wrenched up with all of my new, flow-induced strength. I tore out of the table in a squeal of metal on metal. With my right arm free, it was a simple task to free my left. I had to move quickly. They could be back before I finished freeing myself, but it would be difficult to fight all tied down. I tugged at my chains and my head without success, until I found the catch on the side. They fell off and I sat up. After 3 days of laying flat, my body was not used to vertical movement, and I grew dizzy for the slightest movement before regaining control. It must have been the flow. It was wonderful stuff. I fiddled with the chains on my legs and a second before they fell away. I swung my legs over the edge of the table and took in my surroundings. I was in a bare room, empty but for a single lamp, chair, and 4 tables. 3 of them, including the one I sat on, were identical with chains and indents. The 4th was covered in a variety of vials, bottles, and needles. With my flow-enhanced vision, I could see the labels' faintest details on them. It was a disconcerting sight. My brain was not used to possessing this. It had adjusted fairly well. As I stumbled out of the door, it had already grown used to the change in vision. The door swung open before I got to it, and the Gurk who had knocked me out walked in. He looked at me, glanced at the table, and looked back at me with the color drained from his face. I smiled at him, and a deliberately crooked smile. He opened his mouth to shout in alarm, but I leapt at the space between us, crossing quicker than possible, fueled by flow. My hands latched around his throat before he could draw a breath and shout. The weight of the body and my momentum carried us out of the door and onto the floor. I landed on top of the Gurk, my hands still clamped tight around his throat. He gargled, fighting for breath, as I squeezed it out of him. His hand scrabbled against mine, but he might as well have tried to dislodge a stone wall. His struggle slowed and ceased as his face turned blue. I stood. I drew a deep breath and looked down the hallway. I was standing at the end, with only one way out. I knew from Wayana's description of the complex that through that door at the end would lead to the main chamber. That was the way out. But first I had to find the one that I had come here to save, and Wayana. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed 3 doors. Moving quietly so that I did not draw attention, I stepped into the first door. It was not that I did not want to fight. I was planning on finishing off the rest of the gang anyway. But I had to find Wayana first, and that was easier to do than without a horde of attackers on my back. I forced the door open, and I found nothing. It was an empty storage room, shelves lining the walls, stocked with cans and other dried foods. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. The second door was stuck. I forced my shoulder against it and it fell inwards. I held it as it collapsed, guiding it gently to the ground. It made a quiet thump, but it was quiet enough to escape notice. The room I found myself in was the armory. Guns lined the walls, along with knives and other assorted weaponry. I picked up several knives, sliding them into my belt. I lifted up a large rifle and then put it back, opting for a pair of pistols. I looked out of the door, making sure that I was alone in the hallway. I was. The third door was unlocked, so I opened it. I was greeted to the sight of a female lying on the ground, her back towards me. I dropped to my knees beside her and rolled her over onto her back. It was Wayana. She was dead. I could see the angry needle marks across her arm, ones that matched mine. She had been given the same drug as I had, but she had been broken beyond repair. My hatred for the Quantem grew stronger. He had cast her aside like trash after being used. I had not known Wyana long, and I felt no attachment to her. But no one deserved what she had gone through. She had simply wanted to save her sister. Instead, she had been subjected to torture and death. I gently laid her down, pushing myself onto my feet. I still had to find her sister. I turned to leave the room and I saw more shapes in the darkness at the edge of the room. Oh no. I fumbled for a light switch. Finding it, the lights overhead burst to life, flooding the room. Against the wall were 3 more corpses. 2 were Goan males and the 20s, by the looks of them, and the third was a young Raccoon girl, who I instinctively knew was Wyana's sister. She too had red puncture wounds on her arm. My vision flickered. I do not know if it was because of the rage I felt or the surge of flow that came with it, but my vision seemed to snap and everything was outlined in a nice tinge of red. I was going to kill everyone responsible for this. The ARM members for allowing it, and the Canton was going to get a special treatment. He had taken this child, someone who had done nothing, and had killed them with a vile torture that I would not wish on anyone. All but one. I could feel my body tense and the flow rage through my veins. I stormed out of the room and headed for the main chamber. I was going to hunt down every last one of the ARM and see them dead. The door shattered before my furious kick. I strode into the chamber, guns at the ready. I saw only one being seated at the table. He looked up and I shot him in the face. He slumped backward, smoke rising from his ruined face. I headed to the nearest door and I smashed it down with my heel. I could have opened it, but smashing it felt good. In this moment I knew how Clint felt when he went into a cold, hollow self. There was a point where there was nothing left to do but kill everyone who deserved it. I had reached that point, and I felt liberated by this knowledge. For the first time, I could unchain the beast within and serve the retribution for those who deserved it. It was a strange thought. Before I had met Clint, it had not even thought of might be a beast inside. But I had seen him unleash it several times, and I had been frightened at what I saw. Now, it was my turn to be frightening. A being stumbled out of the door, looking for a cause of the noise. She found it in the form of a plasma bolt to the chest. I strode past her corpse, my mind already focusing on the next target. I smashed into 3 more doors with my heel, finding 2 more living arms. A few shots and my pistols fixed that problem, but I did not feel satisfied. None of them had fought back. None of them had given me the opportunity to feel them die. I smashed open the next door. This time I did not raise my guns to fill the room with fire. No, I stood in the doorway and waited for them to come to me. They needed to be taught that you do not make TEDx angry. There was only one being in the room, a short Banasi. He took one look at me and fled in terror out of the door. I gave chase. The door opened into a hallway, one with a single door at the end. The Banasi ran towards it. He did not get far. My legs, far longer than a Banasi's, quickened by flow, ate up the distance between us. He glanced over his shoulder and his eyes widened even further when he saw that I was right behind him. A single club from my gun sent him flying into the wall, where he fell to the ground, leaving a smear of red on the wall. When I looked closer at him, I saw his skull had been smashed in. I burst through the door I had been racing for and found myself facing a group of 4 arms. Each of them had a large knife or club. No guns, though. That seemed like an oversight on their part. I smiled at them, putting all the rage and the pain that I had felt into the last 3 days into it. I saw several faces pale at the sight of it. I held my arms out and let them see the guns I was holding. I saw their faces grow grim as they realized that they were going to die. I dropped my guns. Confusion crossed their faces, then elation. There was a chance that they could get out of this. I drew my knives and laughed at their misguided hope. What I had done was not a mercy. This way, they were still going to die, but it was going to hurt so much more. As one, they rushed me. Time seemed to slow, and I moved with precision. I knew it was the flow that allowed me to move as I did, but would still have killed them, flow or not. This way, I just needed to be faster. I dragged the edge of my knife across the throat of one of my attackers before he even knew that I moved. He fell, clutching his throat. struggling to stem the flow of blood that was drowning him. A club came at me from overhead below, and I slid gracefully onto the side, swinging my knife up and met the arm mid-strike. It punctured deep, the tip emerging from the other side. At the same time, my other knife blocked the stab with the third attacker. I spun, pulling my knife from my arm and knocking the blade to the side. Moving faster than their eyes could follow, I lashed out with my foot, sending one attacker sprawling, clutching his chest. It looked like his ribs had been shattered. The remaining attackers, one of them bleeding arm, attacked from either side of me. I dove between them, lashing out with my knives. One collapsed with a hole spurting blood punctuating his chest, glancing around himself at the fallen. The last attacker wisely turned and ran. He didn't get more than 3 steps before my knife sank into the hilt in his back. I walked over, pulled the knife out from his back without breaking stride, and continued past him, out into the hall. As I did so, I glanced in the mirror. What I saw gave me pause. No wonder that Abanasi ran in fear. What stared back at me out of that mirror was a demon sent straight from hell. My fur was matted and spiked from 3 days without grooming. My face was a wild look. One of my eyes was blood red, the result of a burst blood vessel. That, combined with a truly terrifying look of hatred blazing my eyes, was enough to frighten me. But only for a moment. I smiled, splitting that demonic face with a crack filled with sharp teeth. I could use the fear. Fear was very useful in defeating your opponents. Now I knew I had to find the Quantum. I had something special planned for him. The large wooden door at the end of the hall seemed promising. When I kicked it down, I found that it was indeed the right room. The Quantum was bent over a table, very similar to the one that I'd been chained to. On the table was another being, one who looked like they had just arrived here. There was no red marks on their arm, nor did they seem to be flailing in pain. Quantum turned. "I told you, brutes, that I need—" He trailed off as he looked at me. I saw a flicker of fear cross his face, but it vanished, replaced by a blank expression. "It worked!" shouted the Quantum. "You are the most impressive soldier that I've ever seen." He did not seem to fully grasp the situation. I was here to kill him. I enlightened him. "You will pay for the crimes you've committed." The Quantum seemed truly confused. "What crimes have I committed? I've helped advance the art of the soldier to—" The last noise came when my hand closed around his throat. I lifted him high and flung him against the wall. "I've heard enough out of your mouth," I hissed. "It is time this monster got a taste of his own medicine." I gripped Quantum tight and threw him onto the table. I grabbed one of the chains and secured his hand while he was stunned. I did the next just as quickly. I was not gentle, tightening the chains far beyond comfort, enough to cut off the blood to his hands. I glanced over to the next table and I saw the vial of clear liquid had a needle. I knew what it was going to do. I held the bottle within the sight of the struggling Quantum and I pushed the needle into it and then drew back the plunger. I filled the syringe to the top, much more than I'd ever received. I glanced at the Quantum and saw him staring at me in horror. All traces of insanity gone. In the face of death by pain, he was perfectly lucid. "You can't," he said, his voice pleading. "You don't know what that stuff does." I fixed him with a glare that would have made Clint stone afraid. The Quantum wilted under the glare, and the fear filling his eyes. "I know exactly what it does, and I know that you deserve this more than any other being in the universe." I stabbed the needle into his arm and depressed the plunger, sending the liquid pain coursing through his veins. I saw his eyes widen, his pupils expanding until they were wider than his irises. I saw the veins standing out across his face. His mouth fell open in a wordless scream. It was the most agony-filled scream that I had ever heard. The sound warmed me. Quantum thrashed in his bonds, his head whipping back and forth so violently that I thought that he was going to break his neck. His limbs twitched and danced, contorting in impossible shapes. His eyes were still open, and I could see them growing red with blood as blood vessels burst in his eyes. His body suddenly tightened in a perfectly rigid pose, his limbs outstretched, reaching so far that I thought that his joints were going to explode. His head was pushed against the table, and his eyes gazed sightlessly into the ceiling. Blood leaked from his sockets and dripping on the table beneath him. He gave one last convulsion and laid still, body still clenched in his final agony. I felt the side of his neck, no pulse. "Hey, a little help here." The voice came from behind me. It was the other patient, the only one who had survived whole. I freed him, and he stood. A tall Baywa, he reached my chin. "Thanks," he said, clasping at my hand. "Hey, when that happened, I wouldn't have... Hey, are you alright?" I wasn't. I had been functioning on an unhealthy mixture of flow and hatred to keep myself going, but now both were fading away. My muscles gave way and I found myself sitting on the floor. The only thing preventing me from collapsing fully was the support of the Baywa. "I think I'm going to need, help up," I said, my thoughts coming slower. Where was I? What? My vision faded to black and my body gave into the fatigue and abuse of the last 3 days. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip, or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.